Stefania Gutierrez Lázaro lived in the south of Madrid, Spain. 16-year-old Stefania lived with her mother Concepcion, her father Maximo, and 5 of her other siblings in apartment number 8 in the south of Madrid. All the Gutierrez children went to a school near their home and had very good relationships, both with each other and with the other children at their school. All the kids got good grades, were social, and their relationship with each other was more like close friends than family members. Even though Stefania wasn't the oldest child in the family, she had a very maternal instinct and was always taking care of her siblings. She was very cheerful and social, and she really enjoyed being out in the world and around kids her own age. Concepcion, Stefania's mother, never had a very good relationship with her own father, the children's grandfather. Even though her father seemed like a normal man and behaved well, Concepcion and her father often disagreed. She was very happy that after her marriage, she had been able to separate from her parents and didn't have to argue with her father every day anymore. That was until one day when her father was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and since he could no longer take care of himself, he came to live with Concepcion, Maximo, and their children. The children loved their grandfather. As far as they could remember, they had a normal, regular relationship with him, and their grandfather was just like any other grandfather, until his behavior started to change. Many said the change was due to Alzheimer's. A lot of people with Alzheimer's experience behavioral changes over time, and they may become meaner and more ill-tempered. Concepcion was very upset by this because she had never had a good relationship with her father, and now, because of his illness, he had turned into a nasty, grumbling old man who constantly insulted Concepcion and the children. In early 1990, the grandfather was on his deathbed, and there was no hope left for him. That's why all the family members gathered around his bed to say goodbye. Deep down, Concepcion was relieved that her father was dying because she thought both she and her father would finally be at peace. When the grandfather was taking his final breaths, he turned to Stefania, who was now 16, and said, "Come here, I want to tell you something." And these were the last words he spoke before dying. "If I can't hurt you in this world, I will do it in the next." After the grandfather's death, Stefania, the children, and the family returned to their normal lives. The kids continued going to school and spending time with their friends as usual. A few months after the grandfather's death, one day at school, Stefania realized that one of her friends had brought a Ouija board. Stefania's family said she had recently developed an interest in the supernatural. The reason for this interest was the death of a classmate, the boyfriend of one of Stefania's friends, who had died in a motorcycle accident. This incident had made all the kids start thinking about death and the afterlife. Some people believe that a Ouija board is like a portal between our world and the world of spirits, and that it must be used with caution. For example, a key rule is that you must say goodbye to the spirit at the end of a session. Otherwise, the spirit might stay with you. Nevertheless, many people consider the Ouija board to be just a board game, even sold in stores. So Stefania and her friends didn't think anything serious would happen. That day, since one of the teachers was absent, the students found the chance to hold a séance during the free class. Stefania, her sister Mariela, Juan, Antonio, and a few others found a quiet place. The kids locked the door, blocked it with desks and chairs so no one could come in. Mariela stood guard at the door and the rest placed the Ouija board on the floor. Since they didn't have a planchette, they used a glass cup. They lit candles and began the séance. Juan felt he knew more about the Ouija board than the others, so he and Stefania led the session. When they asked the spirit a question, the glass started to move. The spirit introduced itself as Veronica. But when Stefania asked, "Who are you?" the answer was, "I am your grandfather's spirit." Estefania immediately panicked. Her reaction was different from the kind people usually have when joking around. She was genuinely terrified. Mariela, who heard her sister screaming from behind the door, tried to open it, but even though it wasn't locked, it wouldn't budge. She tried with all her strength to open the door but couldn't. So she quickly ran to get a teacher. The teacher's name was Dolores Molina. Mariela, terrified and frantic, asked her for help, but couldn't even explain properly what was happening. When they returned to the room together, the door was still locked, and they could hear screaming from inside. Dolores, shocked, tried to open the door. After much effort, they finally managed to force it open. The scene that unfolded in front of Dolores was terrifying and strange. The children were sitting around the Ouija board, candles still lit, all frightened, and Estefania was in terrible condition. Dolores shouted for them to stop the game and stepped forward to take the board. At that moment, the glass fell to the ground and shattered. From inside the glass, a gray smoke emerged that seemed to have a human shape and moved. The smoke drifted toward Estefania and entered her body through her mouth and nose. Juan, who was the closest person to Estefania, noticed that when he got home that day, there was the mark of a heavy man's boot on his chest, as if someone had kicked him with full force. After that day, Estefania was no longer the energetic and social girl she once was. She still spent time with her friends and even had a boyfriend, but something inside her had completely changed. That joy and positive spirit were gone. It was as if a dark cloud constantly hung over her head. Soon, she started experiencing severe insomnia. She couldn't sleep at all at night. And if she did manage to close her eyes for a few moments, she would wake up screaming from terrifying nightmares. In her dreams, she saw shadowy spirits trying to forcefully take her with them. Voices whispered in her ears, voices that seemed to linger even after she woke up. Her fear of sleep made her sleep less and less. The insomnia and severe stress gradually worsened her mental state. She became easily angry, irritable, and upset over the smallest things. But what was even scarier was that the nightmares no longer stayed in her sleep. Estefania began seeing those spirits while awake too. She constantly said that the shadowy spirits were everywhere, standing in the corner of the room when she was sitting at home, or following her when she walked down the street. She said the spirits talked to her, asking her to follow them. Estefania began entering states called catatonic trances. She would remain still, silent, and stare at a point for 15 to 20 minutes. Then suddenly, without reason, she would burst into hysterical and inexplicable laughter. Her family and friends were terrified because Estefania was laughing at something no one else could see or understand. When she came out of these trances, she would say she had been in a foggy hallway, where voices constantly called her name and asked her to follow them. After a while, Estefania started making strange and bizarre sounds that resembled animals, not humans. Everyone around her heard that the sounds came from within her body, not her throat. Sometimes she even spoke in a language no one understood. It wasn't Spanish or any familiar language. She also claimed that an image of the Virgin Mary with a strange, cold smile would appear on the wall across from her bed and constantly stare at her. After a while, seizure symptoms were added to Estefania's strange behaviors. Her body would stiffen and become rigid, her eyes would roll back, and foam would come out of her mouth. Her family, who were deeply worried, remembered that Estefania's mother, Concepcion, also had epilepsy. So at first, they thought maybe their daughter had inherited the same illness. But the truth was that none of Estefania's seizures were like her mother's. Her symptoms were more severe and lasted longer. Her family took her to several doctors and specialists at 4 different hospitals. Everyone tried to give a more accurate diagnosis, but no one could find a scientific or acceptable reason for these symptoms. In the end, One of the doctors prescribed a medication called Tegretol for Stefania, a drug usually given to people with epilepsy, neurological issues, or bipolar disorder. The family hoped the medication would improve her condition, but unfortunately, it had no effect. Several other doctors concluded that Stefania had suffered a complete nervous breakdown, possibly caused by psychological pressure, fear, or an experience her mind couldn't cope with. Some other doctors, who believed more in non-material and supernatural matters, said, "Your daughter has been possessed by her grandfather's spirit." After a while, objects in the Gutierrez family's home began to move on their own. Doors would close and lock by themselves. Lights would turn off and on. And an invisible force would push and move the children around. One night, when Stefania and Mariela were sleeping in the same room, Mariela woke up in the middle of the night and turned toward Stefania's bed. She expected to see her sister lying asleep on the bed and then go back to sleep herself.